Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Crazy Libertarian. You are listening on 88.1 FM. That is KPPP, triple PLP. That call-in number is 701-566-0917. Thank you so much to everyone who's listening to me on their commute to work in the mornings and everyone who's listening on the live stream. I appreciate all of you. Here's a little shout out. Hit that share button. What have you got to lose? So I kind of want to start today with something a little that I've been trying to put into words since I started this little program, and they still haven't dragged me out of here yet, so that's a plus side. I'd really like to talk about the media. Ooh, I know, the boogeyman. It's a little weird coming from a radio quote-unquote persona, I guess, but I'll dig into them anyhow. So I'm sure that everyone, because you're listening to this type of program in the first place, is pretty aware by this point that there have been things going on in the public that we have either been told selective bits of, have not been told everything about, or have been just blatantly lied to on. And a bunch of this stuff has been fairly well known for a while now, right? I mean, we always have these... At the national level, we always have these series of panics and these series of misdirections. And at the same time, we have a lot of very intimate relationships with people at the top levels of media and government and all that stuff. And it's always kind of amazing how everyone just kind of believes their particular side. Excuse me, no Republican has ever questioned Tucker Carlson when he's on there defending Trumpism, and I doubt that few Democrats have questioned whoever is on The View, or whatever they're calling it these days, whenever they call for him to be impeached. And we've been talking about that for a while, right? There has been no effort at any type of logical consistency. But I kind of want to break that down a little bit more. I think that there's a really great local example for us in the North Dakota Red River Valley area that shows exactly how preposterous a lot of this stuff has become. One of the biggest local debates, using local kind of loosely here, in the state of North Dakota, I guess, it happened in Burleigh County, Bismarck to be particular, about the refugee resettlement. It was a whole big deal. They had multiple meetings, they had multiple opinion pieces, people came out on it, almost every personality in the state weighed in on it. It was on everything. It was ridiculous, right? Rob Port wrote about it. It was on Valley News Live, all over the place. Do you know how many people were resettled that they're debating doing? That they split on a 3-2 vote because they weren't sure? 25 people. 25 people in a county of about 75,000 people with a ridiculously tight labor market. Why was this what we were focusing on? Why did this matter? I mean, I hate to break the news to you, but I've been to that area. I live in North Dakota, and we got room, folks. It's not like we're exactly packed in here, you know what I mean? You can drive 20 minutes and 25 minutes at most in any direction and be in the middle of a field, miles from civilization. Why this debate over 25 people? And I'm not accusing anyone of any type of bias or anything like that. I'm just questioning the why, because it sure seems like we might have some more, let's say, pressing matters to talk about in this state. We could talk about the fact that we still have a university system that's costing us money, that despite the Bison's dominant run, NDSU enrollment is still down. We can talk about the fact that a lot of these institutions probably don't need to exist in their current form, and yet we're still funneling money to it. We could talk about a whole lot of things. We could talk about how the property tax has been going up, up, up in the city of Fargo, thanks to things like special assessments. We can talk about how the flood diversion isn't what was claimed and is going to be much more expensive. And by the way, the only person that ever mentions this, shout out to him, when they even talk about the flood diversion, is they always use like current dollars, even though they never actually calculate what it'll be with interest and all that stuff. The only person that really has made an effort to do that is Tony Gehrig, so good for him. My favorite city, probably the only politician other than like Rick Becker that I'm really enthusiastic about, so I guess they have the official Crazy Libertarian a seal of approval. I don't know if that's going to help or hurt their numbers, but it's out there. But nonetheless, we have all these issues, and yet we're talking about 25 people in an area with one of the tightest labor markets in the country. Am I the only one that just doesn't get it? So why do we listen so much? Why is the media as it exists, whether at the local or national level, so powerful? And furthermore, why do people keep buying into this debate? I would just like to kind of throw it out there that a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what's reported, a lot of what makes big headlines in anything is always, when you look into it, it's never what's promised, right? It's never what's actually talked about. A really great example that they did a weird little misdirect on, and they've been doing it for a while, and it's, quite frankly, it's disgusting, is been getting a lot of talk about this impeachment stuff. I know it's been talked about on the policy. Shout them out, I suppose. Get them back. It's been talked about on here before. And it's all over, right? So Democrats are essentially saying Donald Trump is not fit to be president. The media is saying Donald Trump has committed a crime. He should not be in power. Do you know what was passed really, really, really quickly and quietly without a lot of debate? Or what will be passed on a bipartisan level of support? It doesn't matter which president it is. It doesn't matter which party they are. It doesn't matter what they do in their personal lives. Nothing will stop them from passing this stupid little insidious unconstitutional authorization. They reauthorized the Patriot Act for him. They gave him, not only did they give him all the security powers that Obama and Bush greatly expanded upon, they gave him more. They allowed him to take it even further. And every time this happens, it's bipartisan. It doesn't matter what's happening anywhere else. They could be debating about Obamacare and how Obama wants to ruin the country and turn it into a socialist nightmare, with some people thinking that there's going to be FEMA camps. And what did the Republicans do? They reauthorized the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act. What's Trump doing with their Democrats behind closed doors whilst being ousted by them? Negotiating on a spending deal that increases military spending and further exacerbates the executive's power. Where's that being reported at? Well, fortunately for you in the area and on Facebook, the Crazy Libertarian has all of your most pressing needs. But nonetheless, nowhere. No one's talking about this. Why is it up to me? Why is it the 23-year-old on the local radio station that's talking about these things? Something's wrong here, folks. I mean, for Christ's sake. I'm wearing a shirt that says sex, drugs, and robots right now. Why am I the voice of reason? Think about that. And I'd like to go even further with this, right? You hear all of these stupid stories in the media nationally. You hear people talking about, oh, we have to look after these assault rifle bans. There's even one info. I want to say that it was on MSNBC, but I'm not really sure. Maybe in production we can pull it up. Wink, wink. And it was talking about wanting to arm teachers to stop school shootings, which, without taking a stance on that topic, and they mentioned that assault rifles travel at like 2,900 to 3,200 feet per second, whereas handgun bullets only travel at 700 to 900 feet per second. As if that somehow made the assault rifle more capable of doing damage in a mass shooting. That's not how any of that works. Like, why is this something that was talked about? Why do we care about these little assault rifles so much? Why do we care about something that kills like 50 to 75 people a year? Something that's mostly used by outdoor enthusiasts and people that are for legitimate hunting or home defense needs, or just because, they damn well please, as the Second Amendment provided for. Why do we care about these so insignificant things? By the way, if you're ever unless you're in a really, really bad situation, the gun that you need to be most worried about if you're thinking of a crime or getting shot statistically are handguns. And yet the media went on explicitly, puzzlingly, in that one infographic and several other times, to imply that handguns are somehow less dangerous, or that assault rifles are these special little scary, they have a pistol grip, they have thousands of rounds per second with a squeeze of a trigger, they have one clip per squeeze of a trigger, it's terrifying people, there's 20 clips in a magazine, don't you know? They don't even know the basic facts about this stuff. They're implying things that don't make any sense, from no perspectives make any sense. And yet they're controlling the debate. And furthermore, let's really go down this rabbit hole with things like red flag laws that haven't really properly been criticized, I don't think, even by those on the right enough. And look what they do. They just spin it in so many ways. And when horrible things happen, they fail to report on it. So I just really want to emphasize here. And I'm not like, although I might later on, but for the moment, I don't even want to attach any meaning to it. I just want to point out that they're doing some really questionable stuff from a journalistic ethics perspective. And that, as Bush once said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. But nonetheless, I'd really like to bring up the fact that none of these sources that they bring up half the times have been questionable in the past. I mean, yeah, I know that, people think about the dossier on Trump that got that FISA court order and blah, blah, blah. But this has been going on for much longer than that. And the media has never been truly unbiased. They've always been working with other people. They've always had their own influences. They've always had their own edges. I mean, a little more than 100 years ago, I think it was, I forget his exact name. I'll mention it in the video, but he was an American socialist leader who actually had to run for president from prison because he was locked up because he was saying things that certain people, particularly in the media, didn't like. So why is it that we're so eager to listen and defend these people? I mean, obviously, I, for one, I will take a tainted free press over a quote-unquote perfect state-controlled press any day of the week. But it does seem like maybe we need a little competition of the market. Maybe we need some new voices and some new theories on things. Perhaps. And that's something else I want to talk about. Even the media that's been so heartlessly trying to mislead us, do all these things to us over the last few years, they haven't even managed to stay consistent to their own talking points. Has anyone noticed this? When the Republicans were in the Senate, or when the Republicans weren't in power and the Democrats and Obama were, they were talking about how the debt was out of control, all these gun control regulations, how bad health care was. Oh my gosh. And then when Trump gets in, they just kind of shoot up the price of health care. They keep Obamacare. They do all these things. When the Democrats were in office in the 2000s, they were calling Bush a tyrant for going into Iraq and doing all these, saying he was so horrible and Guantanamo Bay was bad. And then Obama got in office and nothing changed. And then everyone just kind of forgot about it. Media's been the same way. These talking points haven't attempted to be consistent nor make sense. And they've kind of been open about it. You know what I mean? One of my favorite things is after the alleged after the gas attacks took place in Syria, I believe it was 2018 when Trump launched those 50 Hellfire missiles, as if 50 missiles were going to help bring stability and peace to the region. Like, everyone instantly said Assad did this, look how horrible he was, despite the fact that he was winning in the area. Conventional means would have won in the conflict. It always seemed kind of questionable, but everyone said right away, right? Like, oh my gosh, look at what Assad did against these rebels, these poor rebels. And then months later, found out that the evidence wasn't quite there to support that, and it was a gray area. And there were actually some reports at the time, and I don't want to speak to the authenticity of it, that said that the rebels may have actually used this. I don't want to really get into it, but my point being, there was clearly, it's a messy situation. Syria's been a horrible mess since we got involved with it, because that's our official American foreign policy in the United States, is to make things horribly worse for the people on the ground and then waste our money and lives doing it. But all these things, right? And the thing that shocks me is that when we know that the information is questionable, when we know that it's a horribly messy area, we always have the right answer within like 24 to 36 hours. That never seems suspect to anyone. No one's got onto that yet. Like, when we were going into Iraq, it was all like, okay, he definitely has, he has WMDs within like a few weeks. When we were going into Afghanistan, we knew exactly who did it, and we were were going into Afghanistan to catch the bad guys, and that we'd be there really super duper quickly, and then the story slowly started to change. Like, we've been doing this for decades. And yet, we haven't had a genuine response. We haven't had anything change. It's very puzzling to me. Because here's the thing. When I point this out, and I'll put it all together in a second. I just really want to say that if I were my parents' age or my grandparents' age, I could say a lot of the exact same things about the media. You know, if this were on some old-timey radio program in the 1920s, I could be on here while arguing against the evils of prohibition about how the Mexican-American War was caused by a questionable decision at the Maine and that it wasn't actually attacked. If this was the 1960s, I guess my music taste wouldn't have changed that much. That'd be pretty cool. I could be talking about what really happened in the Gulf of Tonkin, and yet we still allow it to happen year after year, day after day, generation after generation. That's suspect. That's questionable. That's weird. And that's not what people that care about freedom, nor that care about their quality of living, nor that care about anything that's made this country great, do. But that's what partisanship has led us to. But it's more than partisanship at play, right? I have a little theory that I want to talk about very briefly. You notice that some things are like suspiciously not covered in the media or in any of these things. There's an old 60s song called A Letter to My Teenage Son about like how it's okay to have long hair but not to burn the draft card. And it says there's a line in there that's been sampled a few times. It says something along the lines of people imagine problems so that they don't have to look at their very real problems. I think that's what the media is doing. I think that's why they get so fired up. I think that's why they've thrown themselves in this whole impeachment thing. That's why they, throw themselves at the feet of questionable sources and partisan hacks. Is that there's a lot that the media has done that's objectively horrible, and there's a lot of people in the media that have done some very weird things. For example, we know that, before Epstein, which I'll get to in a second, there was Harvey Weinstein, right? Who was a great and famous producer, director, whatever, big player, who several people knew was sexually assaulting of and taking advantage of these women in order to, quote it, so that they could launch their careers. That was, in many cases, a prerequisite of working with him, not to mention the other horrible stuff he did. But it wasn't, super duper unknown. I would like to remind everyone that we've been living, for the last about 20 years now, 25 if you're especially well connected, where everyone has not only a camera, but a video recorder, but a means to share that with them at any times. Listen, things can happen in Fargo to people that I don't even know about that gets out through word of mouth. You're telling me that this elite organization, and we have proof that people knew, by the way, I forget, there was an actor, I don't want to, like I said, I'll put that in the video later. It's on the tip of my tongue. I had it written down, but I left my notes at home, who, threatened to kick the crap out of Weinstein because he went and assaulted his girlfriend, or threatened to assault his girlfriend and stuff like that. And it's people knew, and yet they acted so shocked and so outraged when they found out, as if they hadn't heard these exact stories and maybe even seen it with their own two eyes themselves. Sure makes it easier to attack nonsensical and oftentimes untrue stories about what the administration did, right? And by the way, I would like to remind people, when that kind of dirt is out there, and we know it's out there, it makes anyone at all, rather susceptible to, let's call it, influencing. And then there's, of course, the weird, horrible Jeffrey Epstein thing, where Jeffrey Epstein and probably hundreds of people, if we're being honest, throughout this whole thing, maybe thousands, we don't really know, and we never will know because he killed himself. Much like my Christmas lights, he didn't hang himself. But the point being, it's not as if any of this was happening in a vacuum. That's nonsense. That's bullcrap. People knew, people talked, and no one stepped up, particularly in the media and entertainment industries. Now, I don't want to say that this is true for everyone or blah, 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 but what I would like to put out there is that it's an interesting little uptick and since this stuff has happened and the media going even further like borderline tabloid level hysterics. I think that might be, and even if it's not necessarily true in like the direct literal case for a whole lot of people, I think that there might be some kind of a collective guilt going on. Because a lot of these people knew, not to mention the stuff that we know about, like how there were some very serious questions about the war in Iraq that the media didn't report on for a long while and then allowed us to get talked into the war by the government. And so I think that there's a collective subconscious angst, I guess, that I could see forming in this. And I think that kind of explains a lot of the crazy stuff that they've done. Because, like I said, there's no way that people that could have stepped in to stop these actions didn't know what was going on. Not one person, not several people, probably dozens. And yet nothing happened. That's a black eye on America, and that's especially a black eye on the entertainment industry. And to be honest with you folks, they haven't looked in the mirror yet. I don't think they will. And so, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm spitballing. Who knows? But what I will say is that something's off here, folks. And I can tell you that no matter what your personal philosophy on life is, as a general rule, don't run your life the way that people who are doing horrible things tell you to run your life. In your personal life, I would hope that no one would take advice or affiliate with, predators, anything of the like, people that do things like defraud millions of people, get people killed, all that horrible stuff. So let's maybe apply those same standards to the people in our entertainment and media industry, because this hasn't had it up for a long time, and it's had some horrible outcomes. I'll be right back with our special guest. Many of you may know her. This has been Bradley Foster with the Crazy Libertarian. See you in a few. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Crazy Libertarian. I am here, your faithful host, Bradley Foster. My guest, as many of you may notice, is
Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
That she is. So I assume that if you're listening to this show, for better or for worse, you're familiar with Cindy. Cindy. Words are tough, folks. It is, in fact, only a Tuesday afternoon. Bear with me here. But for those of you that might, for some reason, be a little unfamiliar, do you want to give us a real brief sort of introduction in your own words?
I host a show here on KPPP LP 88.1 FM, and it is from my perspective as a Mexican, having lived on both sides of the border.
Let me tell you, folks, that is I can say without a doubt, the second best show on this network. Definitely check it out. Let me tell you, folks, this show has nothing if not humility. So one of the things that I want to talk about with you, Cindy, is that on the show earlier, and we've been talking about how the media is a very questionable source, is the nice way to say it. But in the larger sense, it's perhaps a little bit more mischievous. And so and I specifically talked about earlier the refugee resettlement. We had this big, like almost moral panic over 25 people in a county with 75,000, and it's not short on space in Burleigh County is the short end of it. So I kind of wanted to talk with you about some of the historical trends because this has happened for like all of our country's history. For some odd reason, we always go into some big panic about a certain group of people that just got here or might come here. And then and then 50 to 100 years later, after they've worked their way up, we're kind of like, oh yeah, why can't people be more like my grandparents and come here the right way? And so I wanted to hear your perspective on that a little bit.
And the rules change, and the rules changed for each generation of our ancestors, right? They were different when people were migrating here from Europe in the 1800s as opposed to what's happening today. And, I think it's just human nature to question a large influx of anybody. And to wonder, like, where is my place? I think that's why we had the Chinese Exclusionary Act, because there was all of this cheap labor. Thanks to the Chinese, we have infrastructure of railroads. Thanks to the Chinese, there's a lot of things we have to thank the Chinese for, long before they gave us cheap, crap that we could buy at the dollar store or started making Trump's ties. I mean, they helped to build the infrastructure of this country, and they were competing on a level that Americans did not like for their jobs. And they said, you know what? Nobody from China can come here. And then they started looking around at all of these other Asian looking people, including people from Pakistan and from, and they're like, why are all the Chinese still here? And it was like, then they wanted to ban anyone from Asian countries. Obviously, America has gotten it wrong time and time again with all of these exclusionary quota systems on immigration, within, Japanese internment camps, like
Horrible
in all of the
things.
different ways we could have probably biffed it, we have.
That is a very good point. I think thank you for that opening monologue there. We needed that on the show today. But that's right. Historically, the United States government, the media, all these people have kind of not only have they kind of gotten it wrong, but like we've created all of these problems that we're now complaining about, and it's very weird. You know what I mean? We're like a drug addict who goes on like blacking out sprees or something like that.
I think that, well, part of it is that we have the selective memory, but also part of it is that history does repeat itself. It's different for each generation, and how we react to it is different, but also very much the same across time. We keep making the same mistakes, if you will, but also, things are evolving, things are changing as you yourself are growing and changing and becoming hopefully a more whole and fulfilled human being. I'm sure that you would recognize that some of the ideas that you had as a teenager, you no longer hold.
Exactly.
And we as a country have changed over my lifetime immensely.
It's like one of the things that's so interesting with any of these debates that we have on the media, on immigration, on all of this stuff, is it's like people have this weird image of like, quote unquote, how their ancestors came here. And it's always like, it always kind of sounds like to make it like they just showed up at the front door and like knocked with a suitcase of relevant paperwork and stuff like that. Like these people had done their homework and stuff. Like, I know that my grandpa was step grandpa technically was a second generation Croatian / Eastern European, Serbian, whatever you want to call it. They didn't come here like that. They came here a lot like the people that are coming here now are doing it, just that we had vastly different policies. And by and large, they were certainly in the minority. They were Catholic and Eastern European, but because their skin color looked a little more like mine, they managed to sneak in under the radar. And I find it so odd that we as a country, despite all of this stuff changing, historically, the one thing that's been true is that we always end up making the worst decision from both an humanitarian and an economic perspective.
Well, it's because we're not being honest with ourselves. And this repeated effort to hide our own need for cheap labor, to deny the fact that we want to compete with countries like China, for example, that actually use slave labor, prison labor to sell products. It's unethical and illegal in our country for us to do that. And to some degree, every single industry in our country depends on slave labor, prison labor.
That is true.
And we don't talk about that enough. But there's this great Netflix documentary called Rotten. And the first seasons were fascinating. I remember very distinctly how they talked about competition for slave labor in import and export markets, and in one specific thing, which was peeling garlic. They talked about how Americans can't sell peeled garlic for the same price that China can because they literally use prisoners to do this. And then they showed the conditions under which these prisoners were doing this, and none of them had nails anymore because this is all they did. Their nails were gone on their hands, and they used their feet. It was so disturbing because you know that with slave labor comes
reduced costs,
but also you know what is being done to the slaves. You know that it's not.
It's a humanitarian issue too.
It's a deeply humanitarian issue.
The horrible things that we thought that we got rid of in this country about 160 years ago are still increasingly prevalent around the...
Right. And here's the thing, especially Americans, we like to look down our noses at everyone else and go, you know, I'm vegan and I
drive a hybrid.
Yeah, exactly. You drive a hybrid. You're not putting the same kind of a footprint, blah, blah, blah. You know, at the same time, that there is no way you can participate in your capitalist society without exploiting a child to make your phone, some slaves to make your clothes. You know, somebody is making those cheap products for you. And whether or not you want to accept that there is no way around that, and that this country is a capitalist country, which we seem to celebrate quite a bit.
I don't think that you can really call all that stuff capitalism, though. I mean...
It is definitely part of capitalism and consumption.
But is it necessarily capitalism when we're giving, like, the people that are increasingly doing this are multinational corporations that receive hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies and that donate hundreds of millions of dollars to various political campaigns?
Sure, but as a country, we've been doing it. As a country, we've been doing it because...
That's true. That is our historical precedent.
We have and we will always have slaves, or as you like to call them, refugees or immigrants, documented or not, from Mexico, from the countries closest to us. You notice that we don't have a bunch of Canadians coming in and picking our corn and our that's not happening because...
Or do we?
We don't.
Burgum, I'm going to need you to get on this, man. I've seen that South Park movie. The Canadians are nothing to mess with. We need to get on this. This is a national security emergency.
And
I don't feel safe.
Even though in this part of the country we actually have more undocumented people from Canada living here illegally than we would from other countries with people that have darker skin, it doesn't mean that those people are coming here for agricultural reasons. They're not coming here to work. And we always will continue to exploit the people that are closest to us, that are easiest for us to exploit, which is who? Mexico and Central America.
People with poor English proficiency and all that stuff. And by the way, can I just take a couple of moments as a libertarian? There's some things that you get to talk about a lot, and there's some things that you don't. Can I just go on to say how disgusting it is that inadvertently the regulatory state, things like federal minimum wage jobs, price a lot of these people into these conditions, not to mention the actual immigration restrictions that make a lot of people illegal, not to mention the bipartisan, like, wars that we've committed over the last, several centuries now in Latin America, the destabilization, the fact that our government's involved in the drug trade, and the prohibition that makes it profitable.
But when you talk about the rate of pay, for example, it has never applied to farm workers, to waitresses, to service jobs, and it probably never will, because there is a large population of employees in this country that do not get a minimum wage, that never will get even the federal regulated minimum wage, because they are in this loophole that allows us to have a permanent servitude class of people that never will even earn the minimum wage.
That is true. There are certain, there's a reason that, what was it, in the 60s or 70s, they tried to get a bunch of high schoolers from across California and stuff to go work on these fruit farms. And they're like, you'll get in shape, you'll get healthy and blah blah blah, you'll make money, and like everyone quit by like week number 3 or 4.
I heard
The
it was
harsh
week
fact
2.
of the matter is that yeah, it
It was brutal.
here's the thing, I'd have been out in like 20 minutes. I'd been like, nah, dog. Ooh, nah, not gonna happen. But here's the weird little reality of all this, right? It's so inherent in the way that we do business that we just don't talk about this ever. These are never discussions that come up when we're talking about agriculture.
No.
These are not. And by the way, can I say and I know that isn't necessarily the case up in our state because just of the type of growing that we do and stuff. Our stuff is obviously labor intensive, but more skill intensive. It's not as it's not just picking fruit, for example, because of the climate and all the other stuff that we have to deal with up in this sometimes godforsaken climate catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
As I was saying earlier, if global warming is going to happen, man, can I just be able to chill in like mid 40s temperatures in January by the time I'm in my 40s or 50s? Can I get a few decades of that?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the palm trees.
Yeah,
I want palm trees.
Any damn day. But going back to what I was talking about, despite the fact that these things happen, these horrible, horrendous abuses, all of this, boy, we sure do give a lot of subsidized dollars to these industries. Every state does it, every region does it for their specific people. We put tariffs on imports from other countries. We do things to keep them artificially competitive. And yet we don't even, it's weird in this country. We have so many, like, I think Orwell would call it doublethink, but we have so much, we throw money, billions of dollars.
It's cognitive dissonance, I think.
Exactly, because as I've said, I've talked about it a lot in regards to veterans on the show. America, you actually don't care most of the time about a lot of these people or about a lot of these topics. Because, by the way, do you know what actually is relatively insecure, as we've seen at various points throughout throughout American history? Relying on a kind of shifty and shaky labor market for much of our agricultural needs that maybe because of violence, maybe because of whatever it could be, because it exists in this weird loophole, that might not be the most strategic nor most efficient or cost effective or any of those great libertarian things, not to mention, God, humanitarian way to do business.
If you talk to a farmer, if you talk to a farmer throughout my whole life, this has been the same problem. But you could probably go back in time if you could get into a time machine. I know white people love time machines. If you could travel back in time.
Don't you appropriate that from us, damn it. We don't have much.
But if we could, and you would probably find that farmers had the same problems long ago. Are they going to be able to have enough labor force to come in and pick their crops, or are they going to have big losses? Mm-hmm. And whoever gets to control the labor force gets to control the prices as well.
Mm-hmm. And then
think about that. I decide you can't bring enough workers and I strangle your crop in the field and you lose a ton of money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can choose to do that to whatever state I'm governor of. I could choose to do that to the entire country.
Mm-hmm. Pay up and play ball.
Yeah. And so there's political maneuvering that is, behind these type of blackmails that have gone on throughout history. And then on top of that, you have the back and forth of people not wanting illegals or not wanting those people, nativism. Right? Not in my
people
backyard.
Look different and act
exactly
different and are scary and new and all of that stuff.
And we can't reconcile the two because one, we don't want to admit that we have that otherism that we've put on people that aren't like us.
Yep. It's always like the American dream, no matter where you come from, until it's time to actually compete with people that are also chasing the American dream. Then it's
right. And then there's also the idea that when people come here, we expect them to, contribute to society. We don't, like in immigration law, you can't come here and become a burden on the state. It's what it's called. So say you are disabled, need medical attention, or unable to make some form of income. You can't apply to get public services and just live on the dole. You're supposed to be a tax-paying, productive citizen. And the fact of the matter is that we don't have a fully functional society of Americans to begin with. But we have certain expectations of anybody that comes here that kind of goes above and beyond that.
And then plus the crazy thing about it too is like I get that I get the whole general argument that, oh, we don't want people living on a system, blah blah blah, despite the fact that the industries that support these horrific conditions are also living off the system, you know, through various international trade, through, let's call it, sketchy labor regulations, through bureaucratic loopholes that they set up for themselves. Because here's the thing, these people know at their heart that if they could actually compete, either on a humanitarian or an economic scale, this doesn't work. People don't like to think about it, so they have to rig the system. They have to artificially put those little barriers up because they know that they can do it. So think about that.
It's all about saving a buck too, though, at the expense of the exploited class of people, the cheap labor, you know, because if you think about what we've done with the meat packing industry, with, you know, the way we handle meat in America, we've shown for a period of time it was one of the most dangerous, poor paid jobs. And then they came in and regulated, right? And it became one of the safest, most well-paid unionized labor.
Well,
these folks,
there are some arguments. I don't know if I necessarily buy that exact story because the history is there's a little chicken and egg going on with the history of meat regulation. The jungle, for example, by the time that came out, there were a few decades of various, some state-led, some led by industry leaders that had already kind of fixed a lot of those problems. So I don't know if I'm willing to say that it was like they regulated and then instantly it took care of it. But the point being, I think that what we can both agree on, no matter how we get there, is that sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Right.
And the reality is that, you know, hopefully, because, you know, Crazy Libertarian, those bastards will make it worse all the time. You'll have to bleep that on the air. I'm sorry, Duke. My bad, Cindy, but they haven't kicked me off for it yet. But my point being, all of this stuff that goes on, right? It all has to do with government intervention and with hiding things behind the scenes. Because the fact of the matter is that most people don't want to participate in things like this. There's a reason that the diamond market is, you know, which has been artificially supported for decades, is finally starting to die out. And that's because people are used to the notion that diamonds typically come from some horrendous conditions.
Yeah.
People don't like that. People don't want to pay for that. You know, Foxconn got into some really big problems. Though it started about a decade ago. People still make jokes about it, or they put suicide prevention nets outside their offices so that people wouldn't jump off. All this crazy stuff like this. And, you know,
I really don't think that people are ever going to stop eating meat. No offense to the vegans and the vegetarians out there. I think that meat is going to reign supreme on this continent. And I believe that we showed in the past we could change that industry and make it safer for the workers and make it something people were, you know, proud to have in their family. We've taken that away. We're back to the model of exploiting cheap labor, making it both very unsafe for all of the people that are, most of them undocumented, working in that industry, and for the people eating the meat.
And then I would also like to point out two things here. First off, the weirdest part is that we always wrap it in this weird, like, Americanism, you know what I mean? Any of this, you ever notice that it's always the horrible dystopian crap that comes wrapped in an American flag to bring us back to the good old days? Mm-hmm. And that's all anyone talks about. Yikes, folks, we got a problem. But what I would also like to point out, more than the inevitability of a creeping fascist state promising to take us to the promised days showing up in our great United States, if it hasn't been here for about a half a century already, is that a lot of this, oddly enough, and I know that people, you know, we talk about a lot of things that libertarians usually, I will admit, as someone that hates the government, we're not very good at, like, outreaching to these people. We don't have these discussions often enough. Shame on us in the media who believe that government should be limited. But the market can actually innovate its way out of a lot of this, you know? I mean, despite the fact that you'll see people fighting from it in every level, you have things like artificially grown meat. They can be, you know, grown in, it's functional meat from stem cells can be grown in a factory where you don't need to actually grow it. You don't need to harvest anything. You can do it. You can make the stuff to do it all synthetically.
I want a taste test.
They have, and honestly, like, I'll say I'm from, my parents played in the meat raffles like good rural Minnesotans should. I'm endorsing that, by the way, if you ever happen to be in Walker, Minnesota. Check it out.
Meat raffle.
Meat
Get in
raffle
on
at the
that.
Legion. Friday nights, folks, Friday nights. But what I want to go into here is that, like, I'll eat it all the time. We have ways around this stuff, and it might
Sure.
take some consumer shifting, blah, blah, blah.
Look
But
at what we
think
did.
about if we
Look
could
at what
get
we
it.
did with the whole farmer. Was it called the Cesar Chavez and the farm worker walkout? Basically, they protested in California. Midwesterners saw that and they said, "The wise will mechanize." We don't want to be beholden to a labor force that can turn on us and make demands of safer workplaces and better pay. Let's just use machines and figure out a way with chemicals and with machines to replace our workforce so we don't have to deal with them anymore.
And in the meantime, get a
they
much more
did.
stable. And I mean, say what you will about the horrible winter and the fact that, I would call him the president. I guess he is technically the president, but he's more like someone playing Sims before you really get how the game works. You're just building walls around stuff, you know what I mean? But my point being, despite his horrible trade wars, we've actually kind of done all right in the upper Midwest as far as, I mean, it's not great, but we don't have to deal with the loose international network of cartels and bad actors and human smugglers and government regulations and bureaucrats in order to get the food out of the ground. I think that's a success. And like I said, I think that does kind of point out that the free market does have ways around this. And
I think that stuff is happening, though. I mean, we do have human smuggling, even all the way up here. In fact,
we do, but it's not. We have human smuggling, but it's often not the same kinds of human smuggling that happen
Sure.
elsewhere. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's definitely a problem. But for example, it's not people trying to come here specifically to work in our fields. Usually it's the oil fields where it's related in that
right.
country, which is a whole.
Or meat packing.
Yep, exactly. I mean, not to mention, horrible things like sex trafficking and stuff like that related.
There are tons of undocumented people coming all the way up here, and human traffickers are involved at every step. You may not see the people because you may not be moving in circles where a lot of undocumented people are or know about them, but
It happens.
I do. My mother does. And there's a ton of people. You know what other phenomenon is happening right now at the same time? That there's a lot of people here from Central America, most of them. There's a lot of people getting deported. Not just the people that recently came up to join their family members,
I mean,
but all the family members that are undocumented that were here sometimes for decades.
we're deporting veterans. We're deporting people that served in the military at this point. We're deporting college graduates. And let me just point out that this is what did we do in this situation? The United States federal government looked at the horrible situation existed, let's call it a decade ago, and said, oh my gosh, we have to do something. And through a series of unbelievably asinine policy and political decisions, we have now made it much, much, much worse. And instead of having a dysfunctional system where we don't have any idea what's going on in our labor markets for agriculture and stuff like that, and we have drugs and people everywhere, now we have somehow even more drugs and more people everywhere with a quasi-Gestapo police force going around rounding up innocent families. At one point, I think ICE actually built its own college in order, did you see that? They built a college and got people to apply it just to deport them.
Yeah, I did see that. And I was wondering whether, because there was an article that I just saw today about that seemed to indicate that they were trying to detect people that were committing identity theft or something like that. And I don't know if that's true, but I did believe that there was some other kind of added thing to that.
But nonetheless, it's what we have to ask ourselves at the end of the day is, where do we really want to move on these subjects, right? Because immigration is a subject that has not been consistent. It's a subject that the media is throwing a lot of smoke bombs on. And what are the answers going forward?
Well,
I
I don't think that there's going to. There
It's
are
not going to be easy.
no. Listen,
Not going to be easy answers.
there are answers, and we could have a discussion where we talked about what kind of a labor force do we need to satisfy the needs of the market, agricultural, service industry, all of that, and how do we properly address that with transparency, first of all, making sure that we give people their human rights while they're here, and not constantly be creating a black market of exploitable and easily
Disposable.
disposable and expendable people.
Mm-hmm.
But we won't, because we need at that group of disposable and expendable and exploitable people in order to compete with the rest of the world, which uses slave labor.
And therefore, because the people in charge, who happen to have some very, very close tie-ins with the government, like to defend their profits, you, me, and the rest of Americans will continue to pay more in taxes. We will continue to get shoddier service. We will continue to drive money in the cartel's hands. We will continue to drive money into the least efficient hands. We will continue to not...
Our business owners are never going to sit there and look at you and say, look, if I'm going to stay viable in the world market, which I have to compete in, then I have to compete with companies that use slave labor. So I have to use slave labor too, but here it's really frowned upon. So I have to find another way of using slave labor without calling it slave labor while decrying illegals coming into this country.
It is a horrible situation that no one has benefited from, but what I would like to say, the common thread, the one common piece of tie-in that this all has, is that every step of government intervention and government regulation that said it would fix the problem or that would do anything like that has continually made it worse, has continually made the conditions. And yeah, they've shifted the groups, they've done all of that stuff, but for centuries we haven't fixed the direct root of the problem. And we're not even having discussions about the best way to address the problem. It's like the problem doesn't even exist. And what I'd really like to focus the light on here for a moment is that in all these discussions over immigration and building the wall and all of this stuff, we never take into account the fact that we haven't gotten it right yet. And so the question that I kind of have is, at what point do you acknowledge that? And what point does our country start to go in sort of a different way than a one-size-fits-all policy that's been paid off by thousands of lobbyists along the way, that's had special interest fingerprints all over it, and that won't solve the problems? Because we haven't done that. We won't do that.
We didn't just get here because we woke up and we're like, hey, we don't like people that are different, and we don't like competing with other people for jobs. No, this was centuries in the making, and it is a tangled web of deceit, of lies we have told ourselves generationally about how we do business. And the fact is that unless we are willing to examine all of those things, and actually, I disagree with you about, not having regulation or having no regulation from the federal government. I think
I didn't say no. I said less.
Less, okay, yes. But I really believe
Not more.
In this particular area, I think that they need to intervene more. Let me tell you that the amnesty granted by Reagan helped to fix a problem that had been growing like the Twinkie in the Ghostbusters film for a long, long time. And when he did that, he released a valve that both stabilized for millions of people in this country that had been living in the shadows, stabilized all of those families' economies, and improved the United States economy as a whole.
But here's the thing, I guess I would argue if that's them doing more, because I'm for amnesty, I'm for all of this stuff, but I just see that as the government getting the hell out of the way. Because here's the thing, and that's really what we need to do, in my opinion. We need to make it like actually Ellis Island style immigration, like if a relatively simple and brief disease check, a relatively simple and brief criminal history check, get them in. Not months and years and all of this other stuff where it's all ridiculous. So, amnesty might even be a very libertarian position on it. Let them live open and free lives. I don't think that I would be against it. I would have to examine the details of that particular policy.
Well, I knew a lot of people that went through amnesty, and it was there was a lot of requirements. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't simple. Even amnesty is not a simple.
But my point being, there are ways that we can get out of it, but whatever comes up in the future, this is what I really want to close on. This is what I want to bring it in on. Whatever attempts to, because the situation's not going away overnight, and at some point we are going to have to hit it head on, and it's going to suck, just like a lot of other stuff we say on this show. Sorry, folks, I'm just honest. But when we do, can we for once think about this the next time you hear it? Instead of jumping to either we need whatever your gut instinct says, examine it, and don't just say, look at what the policy says it will do. Analyze it yourself, and more specifically, more importantly, look at whose fingerprints are on it. Look at why this piece of legislation was written. Was it written because, we had a growing national consensus that, okay, this isn't working and we need to do something right and just, and will conservative Christians wake up one day and say, you know what, we need to treat people like Jesus would like to treat them and blah, 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 and open it up? Or will it be something where it looks like they might be doing that? They give a little smoke screen, if you will, and then we're stuck with more special interests, more loopholes, more exploitation, just in a slightly different mask. So whatever happens next, folks, God, for once in this country on the immigration issue, can we maybe, not even talking about the not dropping bombs and the ending this horrendous drug war and all this other stuff that fuels the inputs, but can we maybe do something that actually makes sense on immigration for once? I think that we can. But we're going to have to move a lot further in the debate than we've ever willing to be in this country.
Wouldn't it be great if Trump was the one that finally did something on immigration?
It wouldn't really surprise me, but
I mean, it's so out of the box that he might be the guy that could do it.
I still won't vote for him, but I've said it many times that Trump may be the guy to legalize cannabis federally. Maybe he'll be the Reagan 2.0 and swing millions and millions of people in the legal market and into the daylight. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. We know that to be true, so hopefully that happens with our national policy. But really, this falls on all the voters. One more time, start questioning, start being critical, start thinking about this stuff, or we're going to have to deal with the same damn stuff when I'm 45 or 50 or 55 or 60. And I'm really sick of talking about it at 23. So can we please wrap this stuff up, America? I mean, come on. So with that, I would like to close it out. This has been the Crazy Libertarian. I am Bradley Foster. This has been my very special guest,
Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Be back here next week. Thanks again for tuning in on the live stream. Thanks again if you're here with us before on your morning commute. I will see you next week bright and early. Do not turn that knob from 88.1 FM. Crazy Libertarian, over and out.